Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 6. Today's guest is Sherese Francis. Before I begin, at the end of each intro, I always say, all right, listeners, blah, 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 blah. I want to add something new to this closing. If you want, bring your favorite snacks whenever you listen to Meet Me at the Through Line. I love having my favorite snacks on hand just in general, and when I don't have them, especially when I'm having a bad day, I feel really sad. What do you like to munch on? Fruit, nuts, popcorn, candy? Pull up to the podcast with your favorite snacks. For real, pull up to the podcast with your favorite snacks. You heard? LOL. All right, that is all. Let's get started. Sherese and I chop it up. We talk about what initially catalyzed her poetry practice, how she plays with words and sound and the power of language, her upcoming poetry manuscript as an oracular text, a particular 18th century image and artwork called The Voyage of the Sable Venus from Angola to the West Indies, what kind of mermaid and or water spirit Sherese would be, exploring oceanic time, her trip to Senegal, and so much more. I can't wait for you to listen to this episode. I'm not sure if this is helpful, but as a trigger warning, we do talk about the transatlantic slave trade. I didn't give trigger warnings in the intros for the other episodes that have touched on this topic, but I think overall this podcast has a trigger warning because there are going to be episodes with topics that may or may not activate your nervous system. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around how to talk about difficult people, places, events, things, etc., without watering them down, if that makes sense. At this time, it feels like the energetics underneath a difficult conversation play a role. And even then, I wonder about sacrificing how we really feel about XYZ to craft some sort of energetically acceptable or palatable response. I don't have the answers, just contemplating. But what I will say, as someone who is intentionally, slowly minoring in nervous system studies in my DIY PhD, what I can say is that for folks listening to either one episode or a few, or your regular listener, I encourage you to seek out nervous system resources to support you in general and to listen to episodes on this podcast that may be activating or triggering. Some examples are finding a class to learn about nervous system care, working with herbal plants, seeking out different kinds of healing modalities, therapy, talking with a friend, visiting a park, whatever is helpful for you to move through life and this podcast. I hope saying all this is helpful in some way. Okay, so let's get to Sherese's bio. Sherese Francis, with pronouns she, they, describes themselves as an alchemist of the imagination, finding expression through poetry, interdisciplinary arts, workshop facilitation, editing, and literary curation. Her work takes inspiration from her Afro-Caribbean heritage, Barbados and Dominica to be specific, and studies in Afrofuturism and Black speculative arts, mythology, and etymology. Some of their work has been published in Women's Studies Quarterly, Furious Flower, Obsidian, Rootwork Journal, The Caribbean Writer, The Operating System, Cosmonauts Avenue, No Dear, Apex Magazine, Bone Bouquet, African Voices, Newtown Literary, and Free Verse. Additionally, Sherese has published 4 chapbooks, Lucy's Bone Scrolls, Variations on Settling, Seedling, Recycling a Y that Rolls Over My Sacred Site, and Lady Liberty's Smashing Stones, and has also edited a poetry anthology / guided journal, Baby Sugs and a Purple Butterfly. Sherese recently won Inverted Syntax's 2024 Aggrey Book Prize for poetry for Polynation, a Seminary of Self, which will be published in 2027. So, where to begin? I might end up bringing this up anytime it shows up in an interview. Sherese is another person whose childhood has informed what she is currently doing right now. At the beginning of the episode, I asked her, as an interdisciplinary artist working with different mediums, why have you gravitated to what seems like poetry the most? She tells me how various experiences during her childhood catalyzed her toward poetry, which has been one of her main outlets of expression ever since. And it's just another cool example of how our interests as children journey with us as we get older. Or maybe we stop doing something at 5 years old, or 8 or 12 years old, and then pick it back up at 33 or 45 or something. We move on to talking about words, sound, and the power of language. And I really enjoy hearing Sherese share her perspective on words as a poet. More and more, I'm seeing poets as illuminators, perspective shifters, energy workers, and holders of great beauty. We then shift to Sherese discussing her upcoming poetry manuscript as an oracular text. I hope I'm saying that word right. Oracular. Kind of sounds like the name of a spider. And how it connects to her poetic mother, Phyllis Wheatley Peters, who is a well-known 18th century poet born in 1753 on the continent of Africa and later sold into slavery in Boston in 1761. She was actually named after the brigantine slave ship that brought her to Boston called the Phyllis. And you can learn more about Phyllis Wheatley's Atlantic crossing through the website Enslaved Peoples of the Historic Slave Trade, where apparently her life is also documented through the Slave Voyages database. And so when she got to Boston as a child, she was then enslaved by the Wheatley family. And in her enslavement, she began to write poetry and became very well known for it. She died at the young age of 31. The slave ship Phyllis Wheatley Peters. I always worry I'm going to say Peter and not Peters. It's that S, the S at the end. And the Wheatley family, they all have stories like the rest of us, which you can research online. It's interesting how the internet is a massive memory keeper of sorts, and how I literally just type in her name and so many resources come up to learn about her and her poetic influence. Sherese views Phyllis Wheatley as an oracle. And then we start chopping it up, right? About oracles, channeling, and the ocean. And this part of our conversation is really fascinating to me to talk about oracles who exist across space time and learn how oracles have been slash are living all kinds of lives. If we think of today, there are oracles in rural desert lands, small mountain towns, the suburbs of the Midwest, in and around marshlands and swamps, big cities along the coast, oracles who are nomadic, sail on boats, live in the hood, or in mansions. There are also oracles who are homeless right now, missing, imprisoned, in the midst of war. Oracles are living all kinds of lives. I like to think of an oracle as someone who receives or channels information, and where that information comes from, well, people can receive information from one place or several places. Some people might be more comfortable with other words like intelligence than the word oracle. There are many ways to frame what I'm talking about. I'm interested in how people work with words, framings, beliefs, and other things that feel good in their bodies and that make sense to them and their worldview when talking about oracles. If you're not into oracles, or this is something that's not a part of your belief system or how you understand existence in the world, that is totally fine. In this episode, though, we do talk about oracles, and I just want to let folks know that. Returning back to being interested in how people work with words, framings, beliefs, and other things when talking about oracles, For one person, it makes complete and total sense that they are an oracle and they find a home in this word oracle. For another person, they might prefer, like I mentioned before, the word intelligence, for example, earth intelligence. And for other folks, maybe they don't want a lot of clear, structured framings or linguistic categories of who they are and what they are doing. There are folks who just feel, receive, listen, and don't want any words, language, and deep analysis around their experience. And maybe putting words and language around their experience could actually be confusing, disorienting, or confining for them. I personally like the words oracle and channeler, and will use them in the future anytime this topic comes up again. And at this time, I'm mostly interested in getting out of the way, my own way to receive. But I would like to explore channeling and the sources or origins of information more at some point. For example, I'm really interested in the kinds of information that comes from Pisces, the last sign in the zodiac wheel. And surprisingly, unexpectedly, because I'm interested in this part of the zodiac, I feel I'm also being directed to not only pay attention uh, to Pisces, but to pay attention to Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, and the Pisces Aries nexus, and what kind of information, energies, expressions, and micro to macro level events come from these two signs who are side by side. In the end, I took the long way of saying, and I know the words I'm about to say are all nuanced. People are having their own experiences as oracles, channelers, intuitives, receptive beings connected to the body, the earth, cosmos, family, friends, ancestors, plants, other animals, etc. And that makes sense, since we are all unique beings. In this great abundant world, there most likely is not a singular way to frame, understand, and experience being an oracle. In contemplating that, I think it would also be cool to meditate on the concept, role, and embodiment of receptivity in this mundane, magical, odd world we live in. The conversation gets even more interesting. We talk about Sherese's contribution to a digital offering I organized in 2023 called A Merfolk Happening, where a group of 14 people, including myself, came together to share our thoughts, ideas, and artwork on mermaids, sirens, water spirits, and more. The project was ephemeral, meaning the site would only be up for a certain period of time. But for this episode, I'm making it public again and will put the link in the show notes. Earlier in the intro, I talked about an 18th century artwork apparently made in 1793 called The Voyage of the Sable Venus from Angola to the West Indies, which according to my Google search via the Royal Museum's Greenwich, I hope I said that name right, which is located in London, this image or artwork is a plate etching by Thomas Stothard from the third edition of Brian Edwards' The History, Civil, and Commercial of the British Colonies in the West Indies. Thomas Stothard was a highly prolific artist and book illustrator. For the Merfolk Happening, Sherese shares a couple of things. One is a poetic response to this image, and the other offering is her thoughts on the relationship between USOs, not UFOs, folks, USOs, meaning underwater submerged objects, the transatlantic slave trade, and the Bermuda Triangle. And then she connects her ponderings and research to electronic music group Drexia's song Bermuda Triangle on their Abstract Thought Hypothetical Situations album. I know that was a lot. I definitely recommend checking out her page on the Merfolk Happening website to go over everything I shared more slowly. And I also recommend researching Drexia to understand why Sherese made this connection. Gosh, I'm always like, am I saying this word right? I'm sure I've said these words and I'm like, am I saying this word right? Sherese does a really great job in tending to and or resurfacing memories from the past, whether the memory is a person, place, thing, or event. It's a really interesting experience to learn about something I had no idea existed, like the voyage of the Sable Venus from Angola to the West Indies. Finally, I've been spending a few months learning about grief tending, and I feel like there is a reason why people still talk about violent, horrific, traumatic events that have happened in the past. The energy behind talking about it might be, the energy might be different, but people still talk about these things 10 years later, 20 years later, 100 years later, thousands of years later. Um, I know I've talked about the voyage of the Sable Venus a lot, but returning back to that, I think our conversation about this is a part of the ongoing remembrance and processing of the transatlantic slave trade and the afterlives of slavery. Um, I think it's grief tending. Um, the more I learn about grief, I hope that made sense what I just said. The more I learn about grief, the more I realize how it's more than okay, especially for descendants of enslaved Africans from the transatlantic slave trade, to talk about something long past yet still very much present with rippling effects in our lives. And it's not just the transatlantic slave trade didn't just touch the Africans who were stolen. The transatlantic slave trade, you know, has impacted us all because those ancestors' labor was used to build the country, build the wealth of the country. And I know many of us have heard that over and over again, but I think it comes back up and up again because you still see disparities. You still see a lot of disparities and inequity and injustices, and it keeps coming up because of that. But also, I think there's just a deep grief there that I took this part out, but I'll say it that it's like if you imagine being in a grief circle and someone sharing their grief, that you might not, I mean, maybe it makes you cry and you feel for that person, but maybe you don't completely understand their grief or you can't relate to it. And sometimes I feel like, as a person who descends from enslaved Africans, I feel like sometimes I get the message that Black people just need to stop talking about it and move on, and that we're stuck in this we're stuck, or it's just all these things like stop talking about it, move on. We're you know I've heard this all throughout well, not all throughout my life, but I've heard it as an adult that like Black folks, descendants of enslaved Africans, are like stuck in this victim mentality, and it's all because we keep talking about the slave trade and the afterlives of slavery. And it's just like after I've deepened into grief tending, I'm like, I think what's going on, this is expressions of grief. When you see all those events and seminars and panels and all the things that are processing this major event in history that has shaped one, if not the most powerful countries in the world, that impacts the rest of the world and impacts the people who live on the lands here. and that our history is tied to the um indigenous histories here on Turtle Island, specifically in the US. And it just sort of feels like you're grieving in these different ways, and it just feels like there are messages that, like, it's almost like the grieving is not respected or seen as grief, or I don't know really. And also, I took this part out, so I'm just sort of riffing here. um I just took this part out because I felt like I would start meandering, which I think I I probably am. But I guess this is to say that, like, I don't have any answers, or like I don't want to make it seem like I have these answers, but I do want to put forth that I do think when people talk about the transatlantic slave trade, and we're doing that, remembering and processing, that's grief tending in it. And it's okay to grieve, and that, you know I'm sure there are all sorts of ways to tend to this grief that's connected to the slave trade, and all of the histories connected to the slave trade. And I hope that, and I already know that people have been seeing this remembering and processing as grief tending, but I want to uplift that more, that it's okay for Black people to still be talking about what happened to their ancestors, especially when we don't have that 40 acres and a meal, or whatever justice would suffice. And I guess that's also another question. What would suffice? What would what repair would be enough? Some people would say there is nothing that would um, make up for everything. Here I am meandering, but the central thing that I just want to communicate is that, um, I would love I would love I would love for Black people and people who aren't Black to maybe think about or try to understand how this, remembering, processing, having conversations, making art, doing all the things is grief work. Um, and when you learn about grief work, wow, the more that the more that I learn about grief, the more I realize it's okay that we're talking about the voyage of the Sable Venus. It's okay that we're talking about XYZ. All right, so the notes that I was looking at just went out, so let me go to my notes. This is always happening. Um, Thank you. Thanks for sticking with me. I'm actually almost done here. Thanks for sticking with me. Also, this episode also reminded me about the power of storytelling. People can, I guess this artwork really sort of brought up a lot in me. The whole episode brought up a lot, but I guess this image mostly because, when you look at it, you'll see these angelic beings, you'll see Venus and Neptune, representations of Venus and Neptune, dolphins, and it just has a celestial feel. And people can look at this image and perceive and interpret it differently, giving space for a lot of opinion. But what feels really grounding in approaching a visual depiction or story like this and getting a sense for what is happening with anything is paying attention to paying attention to who is telling and illustrating the story. And I feel like that's just a forever orientation point um, that I'll have a forever orientation um, that I will be keeping in mind. Okay. Well, thank you for making it this far. If you've made it this far, this episode is chock full of topics to chew on, and I want to end by saying, happy chewing. All right, listeners, if you can / want to, please take your time listening to this episode. Make a cup of tea at home, find a cozy cafe, or listen on the go. Either way, I hope you find at least one thing in this episode that is interesting, sparks your curiosity, is helpful, or inspiring in some way. Until next time. Welcome to the podcast, Sherese.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited that you're here and excited for this journey that we're going to go on interviewing you. And I'd love to know, how are you doing this morning?
Well, I mean, this morning I'm doing pretty good. I woke up, the sun was shining, so I'm thankful for that. But the world is a lot right now. A lot is happening in in the world overall, in my life personally. So I'm just taking things easy with myself, giving myself grace, giving myself compassion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Things can definitely comp feel compounded between personal life and what's going on in the world. Yeah,
hmm
and I love that grace and compassion. Um, because it's like we are in this like fleshy feeling body all the
Yeah.
time.
A lot of emotions happening all at once.
Yes, totally. Yeah, and I like asking guests how are they feeling. I feel like it's important to check in, especially during this time. And
hmm
so I'm gonna do a whole intro before this that introduces you.
hmm
But you are a poet and an interdisciplinary artist. And
Yes.
like out of all of the artistic mediums to gravitate toward, why poetry specifically?
Yeah, so I started writing poetry when I was about 10 years old, around there. And I grew up as a very shy, kind of withdrawn to myself kind of child. Like around like 9, 10, I had a lot of trauma happening to me with where I lived, with I had a death in my family. My aunt had died when I was 9, and I didn't know how to process that grief. 9/11 had happened like a few years later. Um, my parents ended up going to church and becoming Christian, and of course, I had to go with them, and that was something that I wasn't used to. And so it a lot of was happening to me kind of sent me psychologically into an upheaval, right? Like I felt my whole world was being turned upside down. And so the one way that I was able to get it out, it was through words and poetry, because I got to be inside my own head. And I'm an only child, so I didn't really have anybody else to talk to. So it was through writing that I was able to kind of talk to myself. And then through the years, I've grown with my writing, and it's helped me to kind of evolve as a person.
Wow. That must have been powerful to find that mode of expression as a child and for it to still be with you as an adult.
Mm,
Yeah, it's so interesting, like what we do as kids and how it still comes, it still
mm.
comes out of us in one way or another at whatever point in our lives. And yeah, those are a lot of changes for a 9-year-old to be like, what's going
Yeah.
on? um, and so, what's really interesting when I um, see you share your work is it's like you play with sounds and words and language. And I'm so curious about that. Like,
Mhm.
what are you doing there? And for the listeners, if you could give like an example of how you play with words and sound
Mhm.
language.
Yeah. So I've always been a lover of music. Like music is one of my comfort things to do, to listen to make me feel alive in the world. And so um in college I actually created my own major, which was a mixture of creative writing and studying music, like music history, learning a little bit about music theory. Uh, and so uh, I've been incorporating musical elements in my work. And so that shows up in sound. But I also, after college, I started developing my own practice with my poetry through studying etymology. And etymology, of course, is looking at the roots of words, their ancestral roots, and seeing how words have developed over time and through space. Because we often like to think of words as these kind of static things that haven't changed, but actually they've changed over time. And as they move through space and different locations, they also change form and how they're pronounced and how they're written. So seeing that kind of fluidity of language inspired how I think about my poetry. So I incorporate that in a lot of my work is looking at wordplay, mimicking that kind of fluidity of language. That language is very slippery and always moving and changing. So an example, sorry, an example, I guess, like you give me a word and I'll play around with it.
The word sky.
Sky. So sky, if you say sky in your mouth, it's sky, right? So you get to play around with the sound of sky. But also, when you think of sky, like what images may come to your mind? Maybe clouds, maybe the blueness of of the sky. At night, it's darker, dark blue, black. So sky. So sky can also be related to other words that also have that same sound. So scrape, science. Uh, so you keep playing around with the sound to connect it to other words, and then also connect sky to other images of what you think of sky. And then you can take that and then flesh that out into like a larger narrative or a story about what the sky is. So that's kind of how my process would work.
Oh, wow, there was so much in there. That, yeah, that feels like because don't you also call yourself like an alchemist?
Hmm.
So that felt like a lot of things. I actually felt the energy moving in you saying those words and
Hmm.
expanding it into something else. Um, and it feels so connective, like words as like these static things that are just there and by themselves. But then with your practice, like you said, the words become fluid and able to connect and morph.
Hmm.
That's so interesting, and how music inspired all of that. Also, the ancestral roots of words is really interesting.
Hmm.
Like when I see you post, oftentimes you'll say the root of a word. And
Hmm.
I'm just curious, like it's not every day, I don't know. I guess in my world where people are talking about the ancestral roots of words.
Hmm.
But like, why is that something to maybe pay attention to or care about?
Hmm. So with words, it's interesting because we use words every day, but we don't really think deeper about them. And I get it because people are busy. We don't have time to always think about those things. It's just we use what we have and keep it moving. But I think it's interesting to think deeper about where our words come from because when we do that, we realize that the words didn't just pop up out of nowhere, that they are entangled with history, entangled with society, entangled with cultures. And so, for example, with English, we may think English is just English, but when you start looking up all the words in English, they come from all different kinds of cultures, whether it's French, whether it's uh, Middle Eastern, Asian cultures, even African cultures. But because when they come to a certain place, sometimes that memory or history of that word is erased as people take on that language or appropriate it or co-opt it. And then we forget, and so it's so easy for that word to be misused because we don't know the original sense of that word. So one example is the word woke, right? And how it's been misused from the way that Black Americans have used the word woke, as in a sense of awareness of the world around you and using that awareness to help you navigate the world, but now it's being misused for anybody that it's basically a dog whistle for anybody who does not fit the stereotypical body of people in power, right? Which at this moment is white, cis, hetero, uh, male, rich, right? So it's very easy to misuse a word when you don't know where it's coming from, its history, its cultural relevance, its social relevance. So I think it's important to understand the roots of words for that reason.
Yes, I was just like, yes. Oh my gosh. You know what? Like, I feel like I have to like pause a little bit because I'm just like, yeah, well, a lot of things were coming to me because first, sometimes I feel like people put a binary between like, everything doesn't have to be understood through language. There's more than
Mhm.
language, beyond language. But that's said in like a binary way that either there's power in language or there's constriction in language. And I just feel like there are
Mhm.
different ways of communicating and understanding. And because, many people use words and language, that it's a deep source of power and understanding ourselves and navigating the world.
Mhm.
um so I was just thinking about how I guess I don't personally resonate with like bashing language.
Mhm.
If that makes sense, have you heard of
Mhm.
that?
Uh, I I get why people kind of feel alienated from language because our culture basically alienates us from thinking deeper about ourselves and connecting to ourselves. Because I see language as a full-bodied experience, but our culture doesn't teach us language as that. So it feels very superficial and very surface level. So we don't think about how those words feel in our bodies. We don't think about when we're saying those words, how our lips are moving, how our mouths are moving, where we feel that word in our body, how we relate deeply to that word emotionally. We are taught to think about language and words in this kind of very detached way. So it's very easy for people to be like, what's the point of it? And I see how that kind of conditioning relates to like humanities and art in general, and how people don't see that as important either, because we've been conditioned not to feel things deeply and connect to our bodies deeply. So it's easily discarded because we don't see the point in those things.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that because I do feel like, yeah, I love the somatic aspect of words and language and just how they could literally help us think differently and connect to like different memories um and even world make. And
Mhm,
I really love what you said about the word woke because I feel like now that that word's being co-opted or weaponized, that it's
mhm,
like it's losing its power because the whole point is to raise awareness.
mhm,
And now that's not, it's like that starts to diminish when the word is understood and being used in a different way.
mhm.
And I'm such a conspiracy theorist. I'm like, I'm like, is that, it feels like maybe their words can have such words literally can have a lot of power, one word.
Yeah.
And if you can sort of manipulate that
Uh-huh.
word in a way,
Yeah.
and now it loses its power, its meaning.
Hmm. I mean, throughout history, words were associated with, spirituality and magic, prayers, mantras, spells. So words do have power, and I think those in power know that, which is why they use words in certain ways to manipulate people and indoctrinate people, right? I was watching a Instagram post yesterday, and someone was talking about how people use the word crazy, for example, that it's not just about mental health or mental illness, but people use crazy to discredit people. So they'll say, for example, the video I was watching was about the woman in the Midwest who was protesting men on stage, talking about, I believe it was abortion, and she was talking about how she was screaming at the man that women are dying, right? And the man on the stage basically said, in response to her, was yelling at her like, "Oh, get her out of here. That woman is crazy," right? So he was making himself seem like he was the sane one, and she's crazy for bringing up that women are dying because of these abortion laws. And so how easy it is for you to use language to basically say, this person is the wrong one and I'm the right one, even though the context around it is actually showing you that what he's doing is wrong and his beliefs are wrong. But it's easy for her to get discredited the moment he says she's crazy. And that has been used throughout history to discredit marginalized populations of people. You could just simply say, oh, that person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're crazy. They're a witch. They're this. They're that. Even though the context around you is showing you that this person in power is actually causing chaos. But the word will kind of create this illusion of in your perception that it's the other way around. So words do have
Mm,
power, yeah.
yes, they sure do. That reminded me of the news.
Yes, news. That's a very good example.
Yeah, the news and oh my gosh, how you can just spin and weave a story
Yeah.
just with words. It's like,
Hmm.
weavers, the folks who
Hmm.
weave, you just weave
Yeah.
with words, you weave whatever. It's
Hmm.
interesting. And I guess it's like raw energy and it just depends on what you do with that
Hmm.
energy, you know.
Yeah. Hmm.
Wow. Um, that in itself, I feel like I could talk about that forever. And I hope you do more workshops on exploring, you know, words and language and sound. Like I would go to a workshop about exploring the ancestral roots of words, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
or I would totally go to that.
Hmm.
Because it's like helping me think differently.
Hmm.
Um, and so we're gonna pivot a little bit. You are currently working on a poetry manuscript called, and I might say this wrong,
It's
and
okay.
and the water breaks, an automythic error.
Hmm.
Can you share what are you doing with language in the title? Again, like what are you doing with the words in this title?
Hmm.
And what has your process been like so far working on this manuscript?
Hmm. So going back to what I said about the fluidity of language, uh, when thinking about water, I'm thinking about how water has this power of holding memory, but also it has the power of erosion. That water, through this process of constantly engaging a body, it can take that body apart. And so when I think about language, I'm also thinking about how language is a container for memory, but also can change and rearrange bodies and the various parts and molecules of a body. So the title is showing that through me using those slash marks that it's breaking things apart. So the and the water breaks. So the words themselves are being broken up into its own different components and various possible meanings and memories that are stored within it. And and then the other title, the part of the title, the an automythic era, I was thinking about Audre Lorde's auto is it biomythography that she created, Zami, and thinking about what it means to create your own mythology. I do love mythology as well, and it's part of my practice. And so I was thinking about what does it mean to create your own mythology from learning about previous mythologies? Because the great thing about mythology is it's also not static because so much of our world is about this trying to prove a fact and trying to prove everything as factual, where story and mythology isn't always about fact, it's about arriving at a certain truth for yourself and a certain relation to it. So the error part is I'm going on my own journey, and that journey might seem like it's wrong to the original myth, but I'm applying those myths to my own story and creating my own story out of it. So that's kind of what the automythic error is about. And so the book is me thinking about me creating my own kind of mythological stories, uh, and and also creating this kind of oracular oracle book where I'm playing with language to like activate and release like these stored memories out of myself through language and myth. So I'm exploring that. And one of the most recent parts of the book is I'm looking to Phyllis Wheatley Peters, who is known as the like first black poet, although like that's kind of problematic because there were probably other black poets existing before her in Africa and in the Americas, but she's called the first official black poet. But I've been thinking a lot about her work, especially after coming back from Senegal, my first trip to the continent and to Senegal, and finding out that she may have originally came from that region, the Senegambian region. And so I've been thinking about her as this poetic mother for myself because I've been thinking about the idea of the mothering tongue. And so the oracular oracle aspect of it is also thinking about mothering tongues. And so in a lot of her work, she is constantly referencing Greco-Roman muses and the muses as this kind of guiding figures for her in her work. So I was thinking about her as a kind of muse in herself, as a kind of oracle, a priestess who is also bringing in prophecies, oracles to the world. So some of the poetry is also me speaking through her voice, creating her own kind of oracles that the muses would have done, the ancient priestesses would have done. So I'm thinking about that.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Last summer, I was staying with my mom for a little bit and we were talking about, ancient high priestesses and
Hmm.
scribes and oracles. And it's so, I've heard about Phyllis Wheatley um throughout my life. Like during childhood, I learned about Phyllis
Hmm.
Wheatley and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman.
Hmm.
Um, and I can honestly say I haven't really heard Phyllis Wheatley's name in a
Hmm.
long time. And it's so interesting how, I don't know, how I don't know, I'm really into oracles and it's like, oh wow, Phyllis Wheatley as an oracle. And I'm glad you mentioned this because I was like, should I talk to you about mermaids first or should we go into should we go into Phyllis Wheatley Peters first?
Hmm.
Um, but well, I did have a chance to read the poem Ocean that she wrote. I think you said it's
Hmm.
one of her last poems. And
Yeah.
I don't know what I expected. I went to go read it and I was like, oh, it's like in old English, you know?
Yeah.
And just getting acquainted with that was, an experience.
Mm.
Um, and I'm just I don't even know what to say except I want to read this manuscript. Do you know when it's going to be done?
I'm trying to finish it this year. I applied for some grants to allow me to take some time to finish editing it, and hopefully there's a press in Queens who I want to talk to about publishing it. So hopefully I can get it out with by early next year. We'll see.
That's amazing because you were talking about activating memories inside of yourself, and it made me think of like your actual body, the water, the blood, the bones. Shout out to
Hmm.
Asia Dorsey, um, one of my herbal mentors who talks a lot about bones and is passionate about bones, and
Hmm.
just this activation, and what memories, what insights, anything that comes from you in this like exploration with Phyllis Wheatley.
Hmm.
Um, what do you think about her poem Ocean?
Yeah, I agree with the kind of old language, but you also have to realize she wrote that in like the late 1700s. So of course she's gonna be writing in that
Yeah.
language. Uh, um, but again, like you notice in the po because the poem was written during her journey when she was coming back from London, crossing the ocean back to Boston. And so the poem is her mythologizing uh, that journey across the ocean. So she's, I'm assuming, referencing Neptune or Poseidon in the poem, and she calls him Old Ocean.
Hmm.
And of course, she's also talking about like other mythological beings. Like I think she mentions the four winds, the four directions of the winds in there as well. I think she mentions the muses as well. So she's making all these mythological references. So she's turning that journey into this engagement with all these different deities and figures. So it is this kind of oracular text, as I mentioned, and I want to play with that as well in my work. So like the old ocean reference, I've been thinking about what would it mean for Phyllis to incorporate African mythologies in her work more? Because all of her references are mostly like Greco-Roman, European references. So I've been thinking about like who would Old Ocean be? And this is where my language playing comes along, is that uh, I'm thinking of in Yoruba, there's this god named Olokun, and Olokun is basically the deity of the deep sea. And Olokun is related to Umoja. And so Old Ocean, if you play around with saying it, eventually can turn into Olokun. So I'm planning on writing a poem through Phyllis Wheatley Peters' voice, uh, where she's saying Olukin's name, but in the form of Old Ocean. So that's what I mean about like oracular work, where she's hiding these references to like Africa in various ways through the language as well.
Wow. Yeah, I could see the deep sea, Olokun being the old ocean.
Hmm.
And yeah, it reminds me of how Black people throughout space-time had to do that sort of
Hmm.
code switching or kind of
Hmm.
presenting something as one thing when really it's something else, but it's
Hmm.
both to survive and exist and feel safe.
Hmm.
Um, and did you say that she wrote this while she was journeying across the Atlantic?
Yes.
Because I really see this goes back to like people have been doing things way before us because I mean, obviously I knew other people around the world probably were thinking what I'm about to share, but
Hmm.
last summer I had a chance to go out to sea. I got really seasick, but I'm
Hmm.
glad I had the opportunity. But
Uh-huh.
I was excited to like be out on the ocean and see one what my dreams would be like, you know,
Uh-huh.
and what kind of you know, insights or downloads or whatever word I
Hmm.
could get from being literally in the middle of the ocean. And
Hmm.
surprisingly, I didn't have the, you know, epic dreams that I thought I was going to have in the ocean. I actually had a lot of nightmares. Um,
Oh no.
I know, I have a theory behind that, but it's like, what is it to cross the ocean and to um co ground or connect
mm,
to being an oracle, the oracular, I can never say that, you know, to
mm-hmm,
to channel. I mean, I know some people
mm-hmm,
might not resonate with that word, but to be an oracle in the middle of the ocean, you
mm-hmm,
know? And I'm sure, in the middle of the forest, in a meadow
mm-hmm,
somewhere, but for this conversation, the ocean, you know?
mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that I guess maybe it was her time is why she probably referenced more Greco-Roman,
You're right. I
more.
mean, you have to understand she was also like enslaved
Mhm.
at that moment. So she was writing, she couldn't write to her actual ancestry. She
Mhm.
had to use what she was learning from her white enslaver, the white family she was being enslaved by and what they were teaching her. So she had to use those tools to basically try to connect to something deeper in her poetry. So there have been a lot of criticisms about her work where people feel like she's being anti-black in some of her poems, but I see her poems as more of her being a trickster. And so you have
Mhm.
to read her language as if she's speaking in code, as if she's pointing out certain things without being direct in her work. So that's how I view her work. Yeah.
Yes. And thank you for bringing that up because I don't think a lot of people, whatever their background, know that a lot of enslaved Africans had to move that way. And in
Mm-hmm.
some ways, Black people still have to move a certain kind of way
Right.
to survive, live, thrive out here in these earthly streets.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm so excited for this manuscript and I look forward to whenever it comes out. And that's such a rabbit hole to go down. But let's talk. I just I I have to I get too excited. I want to ask a lot of questions. We'll be here for 3 hours. But let's talk about mermaids, sirens, Mami
Mm-hmm.
Wata.
Mm-hmm.
So it was about 2 years ago, around the time The Little Mermaid, starring Halle Bailey,
Mm-hmm.
and the stellar cast. Um, I organized, but I like to say co-organized because everyone contributed their energy and time. A digital happening called a Merfolk happening, where 14 people, myself
Mm-hmm.
included, shared their thoughts, ideas, and artistic expressions around mermaids and sirens. And um, you contributed several things. One, a poem called Voyage of Kianda from Angola to the Caribbean, in
Mm-hmm.
parentheses, art formerly known as the Sable Venus Speaks Back, which
Mm-hmm.
is based on an actual image that people
Mm-hmm.
can find in the New York Public Library's digital collections called The Voyage of the Sable Venus from Angola to the West Indies.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, there's so much to unpack in this image if anyone goes and looks it up.
Mm-hmm.
Where and when did you first learn about the Sable Venus, and what came up for you when you first saw the image?
Yeah. So I first came across the image from a collection of poetry called The Sable Venus. I'm forgetting the poet's name, so let me look it up. Yeah,
Oh
but
yeah,
she,
no worries. We could
uh,
put it in the show notes.
yeah, so she wrote this book where basically she Robin Cost Lewis, that's her name. She wrote this book where she had seen that image and I think she had seen it in a museum and so the collection is about her going through museums and seeing black figures in these paintings, but oftentimes these black figures didn't have names. They were just known as either the Negro or unnamed. They weren't portrayed as specific people with their own histories, unlike white people in these paintings. So she became intrigued by the title of the painting and used it as the title of the book, while she also used the titles of these various pieces that have Black people in the paintings. And so that's how I found out about the painting. And so when I looked at the painting and the title, I zeroed in on the from Angola to the Caribbean because I'm of Caribbean ancestry. And I was like, Angola. And but the piece is called Sable Venus, which is, of course, Venus is a Roman deity reference. So I was like, well, if she's Venus in Europe, right? But she's known as Sable Venus, so she's the darker Venus, right? So basically, I was like, but who would she be if she wasn't being labeled as Sable Venus, but instead was a deity from Angola? So I started trying to look up who would be a sea goddess from Angola. So when I looked it up, I came across Kianda
Mm.
being the sea goddess's name. So that's what started me writing that poem, was finding out the sea goddess or sea mer person would be Kianda. And then I went back to the painting and I wanted to explore what would Kianda say, because the painting is from a European perspective. Basically, they were trying to romanticize the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. And so they were making it seem like, oh, she just rode on the ocean, victoriously being brought from Africa to the Americas, when that's not actually true. People were being trafficked across from Africa to the Americas. So I wanted to have her speak and say, actually, no, I'm not, this, you know, victorious person riding the ocean. I'm actually being dragged across the ocean and being trafficked across the ocean. So it was giving her a voice, pushing back against this romanticization of the slave trade. Yeah.
Wow. And like if you look at that, I guess it's a painting. I just seen the image.
Hmm.
It looks so like epic and like
Hmm.
something monumental is going on, and it even has like a celestial kind of feeling. That's kind of the scary part
Right.
about it.
Hmm.
Um, and then, there's dolphins and a seashell. I can't remember. And so it's really oceanic. It
Hmm.
conveys like an interesting oceanic energy.
Hmm.
And I think like what you're sharing is really important to note. Like it's about how stories are being told,
Right.
the who's sharing the story. And yes, I feel like there's been so many Black women, Black people who have, in one way or another, um, basically said, please, please, let's tell our own stories.
Hmm.
Who is that? Someone said, was it Zora Neale Hurston? I should know this, but if you don't share your pain, they'll say that you liked it.
Oh, right. Hmm.
I gotta
Yeah. Yeah, I think it might have been her. Yeah.
see now. I want to go look it up. Wait, hold on. I think it's okay to go look it up really quick.
Yeah.
Because if they um if you don't share your pain, quote.
Yeah.
This is oh yeah, it was Zora Neale Hurston. If you are
Okay.
silent about your pain,
Hmm.
they will kill you and say you enjoyed it.
Right. Hmm.
So I think it's like you hear that throughout maybe Black space times that
Hmm.
the importance of first being aware of narratives about you or your cultural group that aren't
Mhm.
accurate.
Mhm.
But do you feel like there's some sort of celestial feeling from that image?
Yeah, because not just that it's referencing Venus, but like there's another deity in the painting that's supposed to be either Neptune or Poseidon, and so like bringing back the whole like old ocean or the old man of the ocean reference, but uh, again, the painting is trying to make it seem that it's Poseidon or Neptune like carrying her across the ocean, when in actuality it's her being, you know, raped. You know how
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of like Greco-Roman myths, there's the god that like captures a woman and takes her uh, away, and they call it rape basically, but they kind of sanitize it in the mythology and make it seem like, well, it's just the god taking her away, when in actuality she's being forced upon, right?
Mm,
But the story doesn't make it seem as bad as it is, right? And so like even when we talk the whole thing about it coming across as celestial, right? Where like is the celestial actually empowering, or is it being used to like cover up something that is actually terrible that's happening? So like, and
mm,
there's a term called like spiritual bypassing
mm,
that could like relate to like what's happening in that image, where it's trying to make use the spiritual to kind of not hold people accountable, right? That like, oh, it's what God wanted, or it's what was destined by the
mm.
the cosmos or the universe. You know, there's a reason for everything, and it's, you know, I find that incredibly problematic because it doesn't hold people accountable to the ways that they harm other people, right? It's this, like you said, this narrative that people create to hide things. So I think it's interesting how you said celestial, this kind of cosmic, spiritual thing that's being used to hide people's dirty deeds.
Then that's really scary because I love Venus. I love Venusian energies, and I know there's so many people out there that, they have altars to Venus, or
Mm,
they work with planets connected to Venus, like the rose plant. And there's
mm,
so much around Venus. And first, it's sort of like, um, first, I think when you were speaking, especially about Kianda, it also made me think about words and like, are there other names for Venus that
mm,
I don't know about? And I've just been taught the I've just been taught the name Venus wherever that word comes from, and
mm,
maybe there are um names for Venus that come from different, you know, African
mm,
or African cultures, Afro diasporic cultures, or
mm,
maybe we could create our own name for Venus,
mm.
But and then also what did I want to say? I think like it's like Venus, whatever name we call Venus, it's like it's its own thing, but it's
Mhm,
like being used and wielded, like you say, to hide something or to tell a certain story. And I just think that it's a really powerful commentary. Um and and so you said that Kianda is actually the name of a mermaid from Angola, or a water spirit.
yes.
And so I feel like somebody out there, if y'all haven't already done it, somebody do a class on mermaids from Africa and the diaspora. I'm sure
Hmm.
it's out there somewhere, you know.
Probably.
I'm like, where is it? I need to take it. I've never heard the name Kianda until you submitted this.
Mm,
Um, and so I'm curious, if you had to be a mermaid, a siren, a Mami Wata
Ooh.
spirit, you know, any kind of water spirit, water creature, oceanic energy,
Mm-hmm.
like what would you be?
Ooh. That's an interesting question. Um, so speaking of Greco-Roman myths, like another myth that I've been kind of working with a little bit is the story of Narcissus. Because I think that story is interesting because of the, again, how people interpret stories and then like rewrite them to mean certain things. So a lot of people look at the story of Narcissus as like, oh, that he loved himself. When for me, the story is actually about, if you like look at the whole entire story, it's about him being objectified. And so he doesn't love himself. He feels alienated from himself. So he goes to this pool of water and is looking at himself, but he doesn't realize it's himself in the water. And I've been thinking a lot about like the story of Moby Dick by Herman Melville, where one of the beginning lines is him talking about uh narcissist being the key to all. And I think it's interesting that he wrote that story before the psychology term of being a narcissist existed. So he had a different meaning of what narcissist meant. And so like for me, I'd be interested in uh being a mermaid of reflection, especially because like bringing back to like Venus is often seen carrying a mirror, and other ocean or water river water deities also have that element of carrying a mirror. Like Oshun in Yoruba, she's often seen carrying a mirror as well. So I would want to like be a mermaid or deity, or ocean deity or river deity of like deep, what is deep reflection. So the mirror that can like go further past like the surface of the mirror, but like deep into the ocean. So I
Mhm.
don't know what that would be called. Maybe I'll create a name for that.
Yes. So say I by a river in New York City, or I'm on the ocean, and we might say, maybe we'll see, we'll just say your name for now. Maybe we'll see the reflection mermaid. Maybe we'll see Sherese. It like and maybe your mermaid will inspire other people to think about, you know, looking at yourself in the waters or whatever
Hmm.
in some type of mirror, and
Yeah.
but being able to see past the surface, you know.
Yeah.
And what would you see when you
Hmm.
um that's great. I love that little imagine exercise. And so speaking of the ocean, I'm not sure if this is the book that you're talking about, but last year, both you and I had the exciting chance to creatively review Rashida Phillips, who's one part of Black
Hmm.
Quantum Futurism's new book, Dismantling the Master's Clock on Race, Space, and Time, which
Hmm.
recently came out in late January of this year. And
Hmm.
so I know you want to talk about her. Is it this book, An Oceanic
Yeah.
Time?
Hmm.
Yeah. So what does she say about oceanic time in this new, like, y'all got to get this book. It's like, I mean, I you know, Rashida Phillips and Black Quantum Futurism just share an abundance. It's just
Hmm.
an overflow, a deep, abundant overflow of this work with Black space times. Um,
Hmm.
I don't think I actually read the part about oceanic time because I was focusing on this chapter about Harriet Tubman, but I love
Hmm.
to know about the oceanic time and your overall experience reviewing the book.
Hmm. Yeah, that was a great book for me. I actually did the radio a radio broadcast review of it. So because I was inspired poetically to create something for it, but it did help me to think about time in a more expansive way. Because Rashida, she talks about how like Black people have a different sense of time throughout the diaspora, that it's not this kind of linear progress of time, but it's more layered and complicated, and uh, it's about this kind of interactive feel of time where you have all these various moving elements and bodies and living beings interacting with one another, and they create time together. And I love that as a meaning of time, that time isn't this single strand of something, but it's these different experiences of life coming together. And it made me think of like what the solar system is as well, because yeah, we are on Earth, and our movement around the sun gives us one sense of time, but all the other planets in the solar system are moving on their own sense of time as well. And even the sun itself, which we use as a marker to tell time, could also have its own sense of time, and that every body or being in space has its own sense of time, even if others in relation to that being or body uses the other person to tell time in a certain way. So that interactivity of time was an important element for me in reading her work. And in terms of the oceanic time, I think it was like a short section towards the end of the book, but she was talking about how like there's that the ocean like holds a lot of memory in in the water, and how because everything is collected together, there's all that memory of time held in the water. But I forgot what the term is called, but she was talking about how the way the ocean moves over time, things that were held in it from the past can come back out eventually, through this kind of cycling of the water. And so it kind of goes back to how Black people view time in this kind of circular spiral way, where the past can come back
Hmm.
eventually. And I thought that was interesting to think about, that like we don't move in a kind of linear progress, that all memories are still contained in the earth, and that over time different elements can be brought back in new contexts and new ways, and it's constantly spinning around and interweaving and interacting in different ways. And so it's a more deeply connected sense of time that isn't just kind of moving forward, but kind of like thinking about Sankofa, where you're moving forward, but also still deeply connected to the past in various
Love
ways.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I could see that in my mind's eye. Just how the waves lap
Hmm.
together, like just how the waves lap together, or being on a shoreline and seeing the tide coming in and out,
Hmm. And
and
the word tide also is related with the same ancestor root as the word time. So like tides and time.
oh my gosh. I could see that, and it's like you can literally see that, and I feel like your work speaks to this oceanic memory where the tide comes in and you're talking about Phyllis Wheatley. And it's not that, we learn about Phyllis Wheatley Peters in fourth grade and that's it,
Mhm.
but that
Mhm.
she comes back 20 years later. Or,
Mhm.
thinking about the high priestesses, the oracles, the scribes, it's not like
Mhm.
they're back there somewhere. They're in that deep time, but that
Mhm.
they like lapped up and they in the with the waters, the waves, they suddenly appear.
Mhm.
And I hope anyone listening, and for you also, to I feel like, yeah, people are conduits for this non-linear oceanic memory where, memories are just coming in this kind of
Mhm.
this way that it's not maybe all the way explainable,
Mhm.
or it's the connected to the movement and cycles of
Mhm.
the ocean.
Mhm.
Um, have you been, are there any memories of people or events that are just sort of like the tide sort of like coming into your awareness and interest right now? Like something's kind of the tides
Mhm.
come in your psyche?
Um, I feel like that's always happening to me. Like just like I experience like synchronicities a lot where like things keep feel like they're coming in full circle a lot, like something that like I was studying or looking at like years ago, like or something I was doing years ago, like is coming back and completing like the journey or completing itself for me. Um, the the manuscript that I won a book prize for example, like um, I, it's mainly focused on my Caribbean culture. And so growing up, I didn't feel as conscious about my Caribbean culture. And I loved like listening to like soca music, calypso music, reggae, and all that stuff. But I didn't feel as connected to it as I wanted to be. But like recently, I feel like I've been more and more interested in Caribbean culture because I've been thinking about performance and theater more and how like our society is built on theater and theatrics and performance and the kind of costuming of identity and being. And so looking back into Caribbean culture, like I've been finding more and more relations in like Carnival culture and Carnival as a kind of outdoor theater. Instead of theater being housed within a kind of building or space, it's in the streets. You have theater in the streets. And I've been thinking about that more. And then like certain figures in Carnival, like Piero Grenade is based off of the Harlequin and Piero clowns in European culture. And of course, Harlequin and Piero have influenced like modern clown characters like the Joker and Harley Quinn. But I didn't realize that like we had our own versions in the Caribbean. And so like how things are relating in different ways because now there's like this obsession with the Joker and Harley Quinn in a lot of our culture, but I didn't realize that my own culture had that. So like now I get my own personal way in that relates to me. So all these different like connections and interactivity of time, like I mentioned before,
Yeah.
it keeps happening for me.
Wow. Gosh, I love that so much. And it's sort of like it's like an exhale for me, or like I let my shoulders go like, because it's like you almost don't got to think about it. Now that you know that time is interconnected like that
Hmm.
and interweaving and it emerges here and there, it's like
Hmm.
things will just come when they come.
Hmm.
And then you're like, oh. And I love that you're connecting to this part of your culture and identity.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm sure asking who knows why certain interests and memories come, you know,
Hmm.
and maybe asking like why certain things are coming to people might be another rabbit hole, but
Mm,
I think that it's just a part of how you're describing oceanic time.
mm,
That's dope.
mm,
Um, and I would love to. So I know that you traveled to Senegal early last year, if I'm
mm,
correct. And it, like you said, it was your first time traveling to the continent of Africa
mm,
for the first time, to participate in an artist residency. So this
mm,
is a bit of a big question, but what was the journey like for you from receiving the news of being accepted to planning your trip, taking the plane, and eventually arriving there on the
mm,
soil of Senegal?
mm. Yeah, so I chose to go to Senegal because like so much was like happening in the world, and I was like, when else am I gonna get a chance to like go? So I was like, let me take the leap to go, and like I had to pay out of pocket, so that was like a big thing for me. I'm kind of still paying it off. But like it was worth it because at that time I was studying about Benjamin Banneker and learning that he also potentially had ancestry from the Senegambian area. So like I felt like, and I mentioned earlier about how Phyllis Wheatley also had relations there, but I didn't find that out till after I came back from Senegal. So I feel like something in the universe was like, you need to go to Senegal. Um, and one of the things about Benjamin Banneker was like in his dream journal that he had, there was a symbol called the quincunx um, symbol that is why they assume he had a relation to Senegal because that symbol is found in Senegal a lot. So I was like, maybe I need to go to Senegal so I can have like a deeper relationship to the place and maybe that symbol as well. So I decided to just, b bite the expenses and just deal with it. And so I paid every month to like pay off the tuition. And then it was a group of us. It was I think about four of us together. Yeah, four of us together as a cohort. We went to Senegal for about 2 weeks. And it was it was a magical experience for me because it felt very kind of surreal being back to the continent, spiritually. Um, like when was arriving on the plane, the first thing I noticed was like the earth was very red, like their earth, it's not like dark or brown, it's like reddish color. So that was like the first thing that popped out to me when we were arriving. And yeah, like it's very sandy over there. So like it feels like you have to connect to the earth a lot there because you're just constantly being like having like the dirt and sand basically being thrown on you all the time. But it I also was reading because I brought the book with me was I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Chiek Ante Diop's work, who is a Senegalese writer, and he talks a lot about the Senegalese like potential connection to Egypt. And so I was kind of thinking about that while I was there as well. So like the sandiness was also reminding me of like Egypt as well. And so like the first week we went around to like different places in Senegal. One of the main places we went to was of course Gorée Island where like enslaved Africans were brought and that was their last stop before being brought over to the Americas. So that experience was uh it was a very contradictory experience for me because while I felt the heaviness of the past, it's also a tourist spot now. So like people don't really treat it in the same kind of reverence that I thought it would be. There's a lot of restaurants on there, a lot of marketplaces on there. There was like this weird experience where we were standing at the door where like it would be the last place that enslaved Africans were brought before they were taken on a ship. And like in the distance, there was like a white family because there's a lot of white French people in Senegal as well. So there was like a white family on a yacht, like in the distance, like right in front of the door, like having a good old time, jumping off the yacht, doing backflips and stuff. And so it was like, it was a very weird, tense experience. And that experience kind of is what I'm kind of dealing with the tensions of time in that sense of like that memory that's still in you, but like you also have to live in the present time as well and like dealing with these kind of present experiences where other people don't have that same historical connection to a place that you do. And so dealing with all the different senses of that was kind of interesting for me. And then the second week we went to oh, I'm forgetting the name of the place. It's Le Petit. I forgot the last part. Um Le Petit Co. It's Le Petit something, but basically that place is less city-like than where we were in the main city, and so it was much more sandy there, but like it was much more quiet there, and so we had time to just sit and write and reflect. And that was great as well. And so I wrote a lot about our experiences there, as well as like experiencing the nature of Senegal because there was a lot of interesting animals around. Like we saw lizards. There was red dragonflies there, and dragonflies have become a symbol for me since then as well. So and dragonflies are kind of an ancient species as well. They're one of the oldest species on the earth. So I was thinking about that. The birds also were resonating with me, the trees, the plants. So all of that was also being incorporated into my writing as well. So like I have a whole journal of my experiences and I've been kind of referencing them as well. And so when I came back, I wanted to create something to think about my experience. And while I was there, I was reading Dion Brand's map of the door of no return, because the door of no return is located on the Gorée Island. That was the door that we were going through. Um, So I was thinking about what it means to return. And so I've been creating like a series of writings thinking about what it means to return and what returning means and this kind of constantly spiraling through history and revolving around in history. And um, both Benjamin Banneker and Phyllis Wheatley had encounters with Thomas Jefferson. And so I was thinking of like rewriting the Declaration of Independence to the Declaration of Interdependence, that like thinking about America beyond just America, but like it being interconnected with all the other histories of the world, especially because I was thinking about
Absolutely.
Benjamin Banneker and Phyllis Wheatley and like how they themselves being having ancestry outside of the Americas, but also being highly influential to the Americas and how all those different tensions of history is working there. So yeah, I still have a lot to reflect on with Senegal, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It was very sensory. The red soil, the red dragonfly,
Mm,
just kind of, my imagination going while you were speaking. And like you're saying something really important, and like I feel like I'm sure, there's like thesis papers and lectures and panels about what you're saying about these tensions of time. But I think
mhm,
it's worth acknowledging regularly how there are these tensions of time and tensions of memory,
mhm,
where with the transatlantic slave trade, I feel like you might hear people say, that's over, it's been,
mhm,
you know, move on, or,
mhm,
how do we move to a healed place, as if to
mhm,
say, the forgetting is paramount in moving forward, when
mhm,
maybe there's a different way of thinking about, you know, what has gone on throughout time. Like, it is possible to still remember and be in a present moment, but there is
mhm,
there is that tension, and
mhm,
maybe the conversation is around just being present with that tension,
mhm,
and maybe one day, like, yeah, just being present with that tension of like
mhm.
standing at the door of no return, and there's like, you know wherever they're coming from, that European family on the yacht who
Yeah.
might not have any relationship or connection
Mhm,
to that very kind of activated charged
mhm.
space, but yet, there's the markets and the restaurants,
Right.
there's all these different dimensions of time happening.
Mhm,
um and and I wanted to travel back in time a little bit and read the first newsletter you sent, because I want to know how you feel about it like a year or so later.
mhm,
I'm gonna read it. Yeah, on February 6th, you sent what I think is the first newsletter, Return Key, a declaration of interdependence. And you know what? Since all these changes are going on with the government, maybe there does need to be a maybe you should start writing that declaration of interdependence up. You know, if all these kinds of changes are going to be happening. Um
Maybe I'll do the Phyllis Wheatley poem on that.
yes, because you know, I'm not I'm not gonna let's stay focused. I feel like I'm about to go down and start spiraling out here. But you wrote, January of 2024 was my first trip to the continent of Africa, specifically Senegal. I bought 3 books with me. Beyond Brands, A Map to the Door of No Return, Notes to Belonging. I'm sorry that I/we might not be pronouncing this person's name right, but now we're learning. Check
Uh-huh.
Anta Diop's The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality, and of course, my journal. A few questions preoccupied my mind for this trip. What does it mean to return? What does it mean to enter? Are they the same or different? What does the door of no return mean for me? What does belonging mean for me? To begin the new year with this was kind of entering, especially in the month of January, named after Janus. Janus was the Roman god of beginnings, gates, transitions, time, duality, doorways, passages, frames, and endings. Always looking back and forward, always in a revolving door of time, always in between entering and exiting, always in the doorway, always in motion, as the name Janice allegedly meant, to be open to whatever is coming or going, to always be in the letter X, change, an origin and constant transformation, turning again and again into something else. This series of writings will be looking back and forward at the same time and constructing my presence in the midst of it all. Thank you for joining me on this new journey. Um, and then there's an image here. And so a year later, how do you feel about your first newsletter, and how is it going,
Mm,
sharing return key?
mm. Wow, I forgot about that. So thank you for rereading it. And it kind of feels relevant. Like I might actually do that Phyllis Wheatley poem now, because like I'm mentioning like Janus and again that kind of Greco-Roman. And also like, is there an African deity of doorways now that I'm thinking about it? So
I
I'm
think Eshu,
oh Eshu.
Alegba. I don't know. I don't
Oh,
know.
that I'll look that up and see the crossroads, doorways, stuff like that. Oh, okay. That's a good point. I'll look that up.
It's
But
because I recently had a dream with Alegba, and
mhm,
I I've been really into Eshu, but I'm learning that, I'm sure other people know, especially if they're Yoruba, that Eshu and Elegba are different, but that some
mhm,
people confuse them with being the same, but they're actually
mm,
distinct from one another. But
yeah.
I had this dream about with Elegba, and then I researched how Elegba is like the opener of roads and
Mm,
doorways,
mm,
and that you actually have to petition Elegba before in order to contact the other Orishas.
mm, mm,
So, but I
mm.
wonder, what other, because I know there is a lot of emphasis and gravitation toward Yoruba, which I think there's a reason for that. I think there's like power, some
Right.
immense power. But I'm
Mm,
curious in what you're saying of like the greater pantheon of African
right.
deities.
Hmm. Yeah. But thank you for bringing that up. But yeah. Like Return Key has been interesting because like I thought it would be mostly about my trip to Senegal and Africa, but it's actually been me thinking while there are elements of me referencing Senegal and Africa in various ways, it's been more about me thinking about my presence here in the Americas. So, for example, the most recent one I did was about the Kendrick Lamar performance at the Super Bowl. And at the beginning, I referenced that in his song Squabble Up, he mentions, Senegal, but like he mentions Senegal in relation to
Hmm.
Compton, right? In the
Dope.
Americas. And and so, like, that interdependence again coming up and what it means to be Black in the Americas when you know you live in a country that does not care about your presence. And so I was asking myself, what does it mean for me to be an artist, a Black artist in the Americas? And I was saying it's about deep reflection and deep presence and speaking back to that kind of like deep deep reflection, uh, deep time, deep oceanic time where like who I am isn't just who I am in the Americas, but it's also me being connected to everything outside of the Americas as well. So, I think I'll be thinking a lot more about that going forward as well.
That's dope. That's dope. Well, I look forward to reading about that. Because I even now I'm getting a whole new perspective on time,
Mhm.
and the reflection mermaid. Um, so finally, I just have two more questions.
Mhm.
You have a project called Reverb. I see. I want to say reverberations, but it's reverbitions lab. Is it
Reverbtions.
reverbtions? Reverbtions. Um, and it's, where you share workshops focused on speculative and experimental writing. And I had a chance to participate in one around music, or maybe I chose to focus on music. But
Mhm.
um, what labs have you done in the past, just so people get a sense of what the Reverbitions labs are about, and are there any new ones on the horizon?
Yeah, so the first set of labs that I did was with the Lewis Latimer House in Queens, New York. Lewis Latimer was a black inventor who was known for improving the carbon filament for the light bulb. But he also was a draftsman who would create blueprints for other inventors. Like, for example, he did one for Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone. Um, and so, like, he often doesn't get the praise he deserves in being an important inventor. Uh, Especially when you have people like Thomas Edison, who is controversial because, to be honest, he's comparable to Elon Musk,
Oh,
basically.
oh.
Where like he takes credit for the work that other inventors were doing. And so everyone praises Edison like, oh, he's this genius and inventor, when it's more like he was a businessman and basically taking credit for pe lesser known people's work. So like I think it's important to like reconsider like who we praise when we say like this person's an inventor, because usually like, and this goes to like the kind of individualistic myth of America and like this like sole genius that isn't true. It's a collective of people who are creating
Yeah,
things. Yeah.
the
So
collective genius. Love
yes,
that.
the community genius, collective
Mhm.
genius. So I'm interested in that kind of collective genius and community genius. So Reverbtions Lab was me exploring like Lewis Latimer as that kind of collective community genius and the filament as a kind of connective thread. And so I was using the five senses as a guide because like we use our five senses to help us understand the world. So I was using the five senses as a kind of help me explore what like Black diasporic knowledge is. And so those series of labs was focused on that. And now, going into the future, I want to continue with that, but I kind of want to keep on exploring like Black knowledge and Black knowledge making, as well as Indigenous people of color around the world, as well as knowledge and knowledge making, and thinking about like language and poetry as tools for that, because one of the guiding texts for the lab is Amy Césaire's Poetry and Knowledge. And he was talking about how Western scientific language is centered on categorizing and breaking things apart and isolating and extracting things. And so those things end up not being in relation to one another. And it doesn't give you a full sense of how it's embodied in the world. And poetry, on the other hand, when you think of figurative language and metaphor and simile, it's about relation, about how one thing is connected to another thing and how they are in relation to one another. And so he was talking about how poetry might be a better way of thinking about like knowledge than Western scientific language. So I kind of want to explore that more in the next iteration of Reversion Lab. And I'll be working with the Lewis Latimer House Museum again to think about, for example, Lewis Latimer wasn't just an inventor and a scientist, he also was a poet. So how does him being a poet also influence how he thinks about science and knowledge?
Wow.
So I'll be exploring that in the next iterations of the lab.
Wow. Shout out to the poets of the world. Yeah, shout out to the poets and the power of poetry. Oh my gosh. I never would have thought, I never would think that way. How can poetry help you
Hmm.
understand science or, have some kind of language around science? Because I feel like there are people out there who are unfamiliar with poetry or they never read poems. Maybe they don't even know a poet, which is fine, but like just being
Uh-huh.
exposed to poets and how poets think, you know?
Hmm.
Um and I also like your interest focus on, Black inventors and innovators and science. And yeah, it just feels again like that oceanic time of,
Hmm.
you're a person who's bringing Lewis Latimer, you know,
Latimer, yeah.
Latimer bringing the tide in with him, and um yes, it's yeah, and that community genius, that collective genius, which also feels like a form of channeling. Like I said,
Hmm.
a lot of people might not like that word, but when a group of people come together, um,
Hmm.
their unique insight, gifts, whatever, come together to
Hmm.
create something, and that's dope.
Hmm.
Wow. We have come to the end of the interview. You know, I just a part two, part two.
Part
Um,
two, part two.
yes, I would love to have you, guests, repeating guests, and so maybe there's a
Hmm.
time later in the year you could come back on. Um,
Hmm.
but first, I want to say thank you so much, Sherese, for meeting me at the through line. And
Hmm.
is there anything else on your heart that you want to share?
Um, I just want to say congratulations to you, and I'm proud of you for
Well, thank
taking
you.
taking this on because it's not easy running a podcast. And this was a wonderful conversation. I am a believer of synchronicity, and I feel like so much of this was synchronous for me as well. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.